YouTube, Dawson Ryder here, and welcome to my review for Power Rangers Dino Fury Season 2, Part 2. So just like last time, I am going to be reviewing all the episodes individually, culminating in my overall thoughts. We have a lot to go over, so I'm going to go ahead and get started without a lot of preamble. The only thing I will say is in the last review, I had the benefit of no spoilers, so each episode I was able to keep my speculation self-contained. But with this review, I did cover the spoilers and read the spoilers, so I'm going to have some parts of each individual episode review that has me mentioning things that I know happen in the future. Anyway, let's get started. Episode 12, Ultimate Mystery. This was an overall decent start to the season. Not like a knock your socks off episode, but overall solid. You have Amelia trying to get a story going for Area 62. It's not really getting off the ground. Amongst that, she thinks she finds Bigfoot footage, but it's actually this week's Monster of the Week, which actually isn't a run-of-the-mill Sporix or robot. It's actually a monster that has escaped Grid Battle Force's prison, which we get a call from General Shaw in our General Shaw cameo from Beast Morphers, not to be confused with Shaw from Chuck. We knew about this for a long time, and it's finally here, and it makes sense because of the connection with Lord Zed, although there is something a little bit confusing about that, which I'll get to in the next episode review. But she calls and says, there's basically been a prison break. Michael Schofield's out. Anyway, I'm making random reference to this. There's been a prison break. Again, I know they captured Scrozzle last season, but I didn't know they had the prison. I mean, Power Rangers basically just murder their enemies, so I don't know. Anyway, but that's what sets it up, and like, this guy's escaped, that's where he comes from. Spoiler alert, it's Zed that set him free to sort of distract the Rangers, and it was all part of his plan. And this guy, his name is Lowthorn, and he is actually the cousin of Lokar from mmpr. I thought that was a fun connection. He's kind of more of a, not a funny villain, but he's like, he looks cool and threatening, but he has a lot of humor. There's a lot of like classic Saban era feeling villain humor in this season, but I didn't mind that. I thought it was a cool connection that kind of expands the lore in a small, fun way that's nice for longtime fans. But he's basically the main thread of the episode. You do have a shoehorned in lesson where Amelia wants to chase down this Bigfoot story even though Jane doesn't want her to. And she basically tells her reporter friends, like, just ignore the order sometimes, you know, and do what you want. And that leads them to Dinohenge, because there's like a report that Bigfoot was involved with Dinohenge. Like, I believe in like everything, but that sounds ridiculous even to me. I feel like I'm being like Ollie right now. But basically it was a reason for them to go to Dinohenge. I feel like an easier way would have been, hey, that thing's been spotted at Dinohenge. They get there, they're in danger, and it leads to this kind of shoehorned in moral lesson about maybe you should listen to your boss. Which, I don't know. It wasn't that intrusive or anything. It didn't ruin the episode, but I felt like it was a little forced, like a leftover, like we gotta have a moral lesson in there type of bit. I did appreciate, though, that this episode, diving into Amelia's like investigation of the paranormal, directly came out and said the reason she does it is because she's been looking for her parents, which was kind of a paranormal thing for her. Kind of like Barry seeking out the impossible after his mother was murdered by the Reverse Flash. Like most of the stuff in this episode that I think was good was leading right into the next episode. Like the Beast Morphers breakout led right into revealing that it was Zed that did it, which leads us into the next one. But overall, this was a decent episode. I would give it a 3. I thought it was enjoyable, kind of just a solid all-around PR episode with some nice little tie-ins for things for the overall series in the future as well as the next episode. One little side tangent I wanted to say is, you know, the setup of the Beast Morphers prison break low-key could have been a perfect setup for a Beast Morphers Dino Fury team up if they wanted to do it. And this might be like a separate video that I do because I don't want to go on about it too long, but it also kind of would have been perfect if they saved the Dino team up for this, and then used this Beast Morphers connection as a segue. Episode 13, Love Hate, your Valentine's Day episode that primarily focuses on Amelia and Ollie getting their feelings out for each other. A lot of cliche misunderstandings, you know, because Ollie wants to tell Amelia how he feels, but a comment from Izzy about how you shouldn't date your coworkers gets him to back off, and he comes up with a lie of like, oh no, I'm going out with Stacy so-and-so, and then Amelia goes to like Facebook stalk this girl, and it turns out it's a restaurant, and then there's obviously a misunderstanding later when Ollie goes under Zed's control, and she thinks he's being cold to her. So a lot of cliche stuff. It almost is like seeing how many cliches misunderstanding for a romance you could have in one episode. Like, I didn't mind it, but it was a little bit cliche. I was glad we finally got them together, though, and I like that they actually got them together earlier in the season. Unless it's something established like Calvin or Haley, they usually have the PR romances get together right in the finale. So I thought that was kind of nice. And I think they have good chemistry, and I think the lesson of this episode was like, basically just be honest and don't let things get in your head, and it felt less forced than last episode's lesson. And as mentioned, Ollie gets under the control of Zed because he uses Ollie to break into the base to get info on Rafcon because he wants to head there in the next episode, which I thought was a good plot. I thought it was nice that Zed singled Ollie out because he had like insulted him previously, and Ollie was like a little bit robotic, like under a spell feel when he was like non-morphed, but when he was morphed, like with the voice acting, he actually came off as kind of a cool villain ranger, and it made me wish he was under Zed's control for a few episodes. I think that would have been an interesting arc. I have to say that I'm going to talk about this probably in the next couple episodes, that I liked Zed a lot more this time around. His voice still isn't perfect, but maybe it was just me, but in these last few episodes he appeared, I thought that his voice sounded a lot better. At least to me, it sounded a little bit closer-ish to trying to be like the original one. It's never going to sound just like it, and my headcanon is because they brought back, at least from my perception, like the evil part of him that got burned off during the Countdown to Destruction wave, that his voice is going to be different, kind of like how Mesogog's was more monstrous when he separated from Mercer. And in general, I actually thought he came off more like Lord Zed. He had several lines all throughout the next 3 episodes that sounded like something he would have said during season 2 and 3. He had several smart plans. Like, this one was a pretty smart plan. I mean, talking about his plans in front of Ollie so that he could get it ruined later, probably not so smart. But for the most part, he had some really smart plans in this, and I liked that. I was confused about his whole, like, getting his staff backstory, because I thought it was with Grid Battle Force, and that was the point of him breaking into Grid Battle Force. It was a nice, easy connection, but he said that instead, like, he got Scrozzle, and then he helped him get it out of the crystal dimension. I was kind of confused by that. And also, Scrozzle is back there with him, and he mentions to Zed, like, oh, you know, you're such a good boss or something, better than Evox, but don't tell him I said that. That could have just meant to have been like a funny line, which I think it was, but some people take it to mean that maybe Evox is alive. I think that door is always potentially open given what they did with him, but I thought it was worth noting. One I would probably give an overall 3 out of 5, just like the last one. Very solid one, balanced with kind of your story of the week with a more serialized plot running in the background. Next up, episode 14, Rafcon Revealed. This was a much more significant and big episode, as since they find out Zed's heading to Rafcon, they need to head there themselves. Before I get to all that main stuff though, I do want to talk about the B-plot, which was a Nerf War storyline with Jane Jayborg and the Buzz Blast staff, which honestly, if I'm being honest, was probably my favorite Jane and Jayborg B story. I thought it was fun, harmless, there was lots of funny moments like the fake horse delivery. Was it stupid? Yes. Was it funny? Yes. And I thought there was a lot of just funny moments within it. Part of me wishes it happened in a different episode because it did tonally make this episode a little strange, and I wish they would have dedicated the whole episode to Rafcon, but it didn't bother me that much. It's kind of like, hey, this maybe would have been better in a different episode. But I thought it was one of the best storylines, and it was like a funny Nerf product placement because of Hasbro. So they go to Rafcon, and they use the Cosmic Keys and the Cosmic Zords, and I can't help but wonder, like, is this going to somehow have to do with Cosmic Fury? It could just be a coincidence, and they didn't know when they made this season that they were going to be doing Cosmic Fury. They might not even known it was going to be named Cosmic Fury. But when they sat down to start Cosmic Fury development and writing, they had to have thought about this, right? Like, I feel like something with the Raptors has to be mentioned or done in Cosmic Fury. I just have to note that, not just because it has the name Cosmic in it, it's more like they use it to interdimensional travel with space. And I don't know, I feel like there has to be a connection there, right? Probably not. Ion is a little bit, like, much in this episode. Like, he basically is really motivated because he believes, because she told him, that the Green Morphin Master brought him back to defeat Zed. So he thinks he's the only one that can do it, and it's his purpose. And I did like that because it made sense, because he feels kind of an extra level of responsibility, but I feel it was a little bit turned up to 11 just for the sake of the plot, which only bothered me slightly. When they get to Rafcon, it's really funny because they're like, oh my god, that's Rafcon? And it's like, dude, it looks like Earth, just like, but they like copy and pasted like the geography a bunch of times. Like, it just looks like a busier Earth. But anyway, they get there, and it has one of my favorite scenes in the whole series, which is them just kind of overlooking this vista and Zato explaining what it used to look like. Now, I loved this scene for several reasons. I mean, first of all, I think it was one of the most beautiful and unique New Zealand shots. Like, we've seen a lot of New Zealand, and by a lot of New Zealand, I mean like the same 15 locations over the last decade or 2 decades or however long. Man, time. But anyway, I don't recall us ever using this location. It was beautiful, number one. But the way they shot it was one of the most cinematic shots. In fact, there's at least a handful of scenes in the second half season that were some of the most cinematic I've seen in PR in a long time, if ever. But this was a very cinematic looking scene in general. The music, the score was perfect. Unfortunately, you're going to hear me mention the score being amazing multiple times in this review, because it really hit at some great times, and this was one of them. But so on top of all that, the visual beauty, the musical beauty, it was a great character moment for Zato as he described what it used to look like reminiscing about this is how great it was before the war, and then, like, you know, the melancholy of like, okay, this is what it was like after the war. And I also like how realistic, I say, because I can't say I'm not a scientist that would say I know this, but realistic-ish that's been millions of years, so everything's been kind of grown over and changed. It's kind of like an After-Earth situation. I do find it kind of convenient that the Sporix installations that everyone's looking for are easy to find, but there's no other rubble. I get budget reasons, and this doesn't bother me in a negative way, but it would have been nice to maybe have a couple little props of like some rubble or like ruins or something, because it's like very clean, except for the Spork installation. Again, I really liked Zed in this last stretch of episodes more than last time. He had some really good lines, and this one he had a really savage one when he said, "Make like a tree and get out of here." No, he said to Zato, he's like, "Why don't you like take after the rest of your people and go extinct?" And then he blasted him. I'm like, damn, that was savage. But as we know from the spoilers, Zato gets injured, and just before Zed's about to take them all out, they get transported away, and the Green Morphin Master shows up and says, "Everything is going to be alright." This was a great episode, though. Absolutely, for me, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. I almost wanted to do a 4 because I felt that the Nerf fight should have been in a different episode, but I did like the Nerf fight, so I felt like I was being nitpicky, and 5 out of 5s are rare for me. This was a great episode. Next up, Morphin Master. Now, this was technically our clip show. I mentioned this in the spoiler video. It got some people upset. But it wasn't really a full clip show. It was like 15% a clip show. But it did use that format where they utilize clips for the story. It's almost like a leftover holdover from having to have episodes that have clip shows a part of it. But they only showed clips of how the Dino Fury Rangers were helped and then explaining the other things away, which I really liked. And I think it was my favorite use of the clip show because it actually retroactively explained certain lore just like they did with the Morphin Masters. Because if you didn't know, they explained that the Green Morphin Master not only intervened with the Dino Fury Rangers, but she was responsible for the Rangers, including the new powers showing up in Legendary Battle, for the coin that showed up for Jason and the other Ranger team showing up in the Dino team-up, as well as Steel coming back as a less cool version of himself. And a lot of people call that lazy. It is hand-wavy, to be sure, but I don't mind it in the slightest. They did not have to explain this stuff. I actually appreciate the effort of them saying, hey, what's some stuff we can maybe explain that fans are kind of upset about? I appreciate that. Is it easy? Yes. Do I like it? Yes. I just really like that, and for me it deepens the lore, and even though it wasn't planned, it retroactively creates a really cool through line that makes all of the more modern seasons and older seasons feel more connected. It was funny though because Ion's like, "I failed you, I didn't know I was strong enough to defeat Zed," and I was confused about his role because right after he said that she said, "Yeah, guess you guys just weren't as tough as I thought, so here's this cool Master Blade." But later, it did come around to the cliche I thought it was going to be, which was, you didn't have to do it alone. So basically it was, the team needs the 6th Ranger. But I just thought it was funny that it was initially presented as, man, I thought you guys were stronger. He gives them the Master Saber, which gives them a power-up that's not only going to help them in general, but it also has like a final finisher that basically will kill you if you use it, but it harnesses all the power of the Zords. Also, it's funny because, okay, so Blue Morphin Master shows up and basically says, the Morphin Masters aren't supposed to interfere. Zato's like, bullshit, you interfered before. And he's like, well, yeah, after we did that, we got hunted and there's only a handful of us left. And so we don't interfere. I like this because it lines up with the comic in a way. I know some people will be upset by me saying that, and who knows, they could blow the comic lore out of the water later. But for now, this does line up with the Morphin Masters saying they wouldn't interfere in the comic, and it also explains why we only have this handful that look slightly different than the ones we've seen, but they still look like the ones we've seen in the comic. I really liked that. Makes me curious about who's hunting them. Since we are gifted a 3rd season, I really hope that's explored, at least for an episode. I thought that was really cool. It's funny to me that Zato is like making her case by explaining how the good she's done, but it's also funny because it's like, he's giving them more evidence. He's like, wait, here's like 20 more reasons to lock her up. Also enjoyed the fact that like when Blue tried to lock Green up, she's like, I will do what I must. So Rafcon gets blown up after Zed gets the Sporix machine. And it's kind of an intense moment, especially for PR. Kind of an intense moment for the Rafcon people. And I mean, by that I mean Zato and Ion. I wish it was explored more later in the season in terms of the grief, but I guess because he meets his people later, it doesn't matter. But it's still an intense moment and pretty epic and, again, more tragic than PR is used to. And they face off with Zed, who is hooking up with Void Knight's family again. Wait, that sounds weird. Working with them, because in the previous episode, he worked with them to get upgraded versions of the villain bots, including the Boom Tower one, which is not threatening at all. Like, he's kind of funny and sniveling, but I feel like it negates the threatening level of these characters when they're like, they're more powerful versions of the robot villains, but then they're all comedic relief. Basically burned them before, and then they agree to work together again, and it doesn't work out so well. But the bottom line is they go to fight Zed, and even with the power of the Master power-up that Zato Ion uses, they can't quite defeat him, and it's up to the Green Morphin Master to do it, and she seals herself with Zed. Initially from the spoilers, I thought Blue and Red sealed Green and Zed together, but she sealed herself in with Zed. But as a result of Zato making her case, they decided to free Green. And I think that obviously based on what happens at the finale, they're much more open to helping now and maybe going to find a balance. There's 6 of them. What they should do is have like, hey, you 3 intervene, the other 3 can stay safe. Because the reason they gave for not intervening wasn't just we're scared for our life, was we're protecting the grid, which is tied to all life itself, which is another bit of comic lore, which might just be a coincidence because I think that was revealed in Power Rangers universe. But I still like that. Anyway, I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 5. I know it was a clip show-ish, but it was a really great lore episode, and my favorite use of the clip show because it was used to deepen the overall series. Now we hit a little bit more of a stretch of filler episodes, but that doesn't mean bad ones. Episode 16, Wishful Thinking, is an episode, kind of a classic premise of not just PR or Sentai, but any TV show, of sort of the monkey's paw wishes gone wrong thing. And the Rangers are tricked by this wish monster that has these trinkets that are actually given to them by Mucus, who accidentally gets a wish gone wrong because she wishes for a hat, but then it turns her human. From the spoilers, I initially thought she wanted to be human, and she later disguises herself as human in the finale, so I don't know what that's about. But anyway, I kind of like that twist, that it wasn't that she wanted to be human. She actually actively did not want to be human, and preferred herself as a fungus. And like later on, wanted the monster to be destroyed so she can go back to normal. I thought that was a nice twist on what usually would happen. But basically, like, Chase gets what he wants and he gets a bunch of views on his video, and his lesson is about learning that you have to do the hard work yourself to, you know, achieve any level of success. And there's like, the wishes going wrong leads to Amelia turning into a kid, Izzy turning into the Tiramigo physical suit, which is funny. I have to say, it led to some funny moments. It was pretty much done because they wanted to use the footage of Dino Knight Armor Red writing on him. Not like that. But I feel like there could have been better ways to explain that were less stupid. But, I mean, it was funny. Don't get me wrong. I liked it. I thought, you know what? That was a fun, creative way to do it. And it led to some funny lines. Like Izzy being like, how is Fern going to tell people her girlfriend's a dinosaur? Funny moments. But I feel like they could have just been like, hey, for this fight, we're going to shrink down the Zord to fight with you. But instead, they're like, let's turn Izzy into the dinosaur. I don't know. It's kind of funny. And Ollie gets turned into an action figure, which I don't know where that came from. Looks like a Hasbro prototype. But it leads to some funny antics. It was a little bit mixed for me. One thing I did like about the moral lesson of the episode was that when they're like, okay, Chase, if you give this up, everything will go back to normal. Chase is like, can we just wait a little bit so I can get some fame? And that's one of the themes I really liked about this second half of the season in particular, is that there's many moments where the characters actually have flawed and selfish moments, which almost makes me clutch my pearls, because for the last decade, the characters have been such GD goody two-shoes that it's weird. And I actually appreciate that. I like seeing them act more like flawed human beings, and seeing them become better and overcome that, for me, is more inspiring than feeling like the character is a perfect goody two-shoes that's making me feel bad for not being the goody two-shoes. So I did appreciate that element of it. And there was a really nice scene with Ollie's mom, who mostly has nice scenes in this. Although she did say something about like, oh, wishes aren't real like Ollie. I'm like, really? You too, Ollie's mom? You too? And also there was a nice moment where Amelia's wish was to see her parents, and it kind of reminded me of Last Jedi. Let me see them. My parents. And she didn't get to see them. I only want to bring that up because I think it was a nice next little touchstone on her arc for the rest of the series. Episode, though, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. I almost gave it a 2, but that seemed almost too harsh. It wasn't my favorite, but I still think it was entertaining. Episode 17, Things Unspoken. This was a Izzy and Fern focus episode, and I think was one of the strongest character-driven episodes of the season, for several reasons. I thought it was a nice relationship focus for Izzy and Fern. One of the main focuses was them saying I love you to each other for the first time, and it was done in kind of a neat way where she told Green Ranger, not knowing it was Izzy, that she loved her girlfriend, and then later Izzy said, oh, I love you too, and she said, I never said that to you. I thought that was kind of a funny way to get caught. But it was nice for their relationship, and also it was a nice relationship moment. And I also appreciate that their relationship has been more like seeded throughout the season, because I mentioned how like Ranger relationship usually they only resolve at the very end, and then usually non-Ranger relationships, meaning a Ranger dating an outsider, usually it's like you see him for an episode or two. And I kind of like that she had a more presence in this season. This episode does take her off the board until the finale, but I like the presence she's had. And what I liked most about this episode was actually that this was one of the first times in a long time, and it's also something that I feel doesn't come up very often in Power Rangers, is seeing a Ranger's Ranger life interfere with their personal life in almost a Spider-Man-esque way, because Fern is moving away to go to college, and Izzy has an opportunity to go with her, but she declines it so she can be a Ranger. And kudos to Izzy for choosing to be a Ranger over it and the other Ranger supporting her. If this was Kim, she would have been replaced by an evil cat lady and had it in charge like a lot for a pizza party years later. But anyway, I thought that was a good heroic decision, and it was kind of nice to see her struggling with this, like, the secret, and, like, what do I tell her, and I have to make the sacrifice, and my parents are upset, and it felt, again, like a very Spider-Man-like moment, and I feel like we don't get those often with PR, or touched on with depth, and a lot of the way it was written and performed in terms of Izzy and Fern, and even her dad, felt very real, and I liked that a lot. I really liked that. It felt like a very personal episode. That was a nice touch, and I thought they broke up based on the spoilers, but they didn't. It was kind of more like, hey, let's do long distance, and because she comes back in the finale. And I also am glad that she mentioned that she can teleport. I was like, if these benches say, you shouldn't use your powers to teleport, I'm like, she can teleport to see her girlfriend. Both small little things. In addition to this being a character-focused episode, it does start the sort of arc about Void Knight and the others trying to get their hands on this key to this drill so they can break into the base. So I like that this episode also contributed to the overall plot. I thought that was a funny line when, I think it was it, not Preston. What's this dude's name? Ollie. He calls them the Voids, and I think Ian says, you call them the Voids? I don't know why, I thought that was funny. Also, when Fern left, she said, may the power protect you. I don't know, I just appreciated that. There's lots of little Easter eggs in this season, some of which I like, some of which I think are forced. Like, Lowthorn, I liked. The fact that he said, I can see Angel Grove from here before he got kicked out. I thought that was forced. But the May the Power Protect You, I thought it was nice. Overall, I'm giving this one a 5 out of 5 too. I thought this was the strongest character episode of the season, in my opinion. I really liked it, not to mention it also furthered the plot. Next up, Guilt Trip. This was a primarily Ollie-focused episode, and it focuses around Ollie not making time for his mom like he used to, because they used to be uber close, and now he's with Amelia, so he's kind of ghosting her and being distant. Results in him kind of accidentally messing up some work for her, and just overall not having a balance between family and that. And this was another episode where I liked the realism of it, because I'm sure lots of people can relate to that type of thing happening, prioritizing various people and aspects in your life, and a lot about the way it was written and performed, I felt real, like real people. Unlike, again, I hate to keep harping on it, but the Neo Saban mannequins, I really liked that. And even when they were planning on going on this trip, and Ollie manipulated Ion into going, saying, hey, if you go to Japan to help my mom, you can eat Japanese food. And it led to some funny Ion loves food moments. And I like that. It was like it seems weird to celebrate a character being selfish, but it felt so real. And there was nothing wrong with it. Like, I'm glad he resolved things with his mom, but there was nothing to be ashamed of that he wanted to have a night out with his girlfriend. One of my more favorite Ollie episodes. Like, I just really liked how realistically the behavior of the characters was. And also, again, it continued to further the plot line of Void Knight trying to get his hands on this drill. So I like that amongst these more filler episodes, which they're not even fully filler because I think they're really good character episodes, there's a through line of a larger plot going on. I also just really liked the vibe of this episode. The structure of it felt very different, with the Rangers kind of investigating and Ion taking his little trip to Japan. It just felt very non-traditional. Also, a random little bit is I really liked the end when they're all going to eat. It's like really corny, but they say, it's ramen time! And the reason I liked it wasn't because of that. I mean, it's fine. But the freeze frame reminded me of the classic old, freeze frame, executive producers Haim Shaban, Shuki Levy endings. Episode 19, Bad Vibes. This was our last more filler-driven episode, but it also started to move the momentum on the plot farther. And basically it was Izzy and Javi focused. I would say kind of more Garcia family-esque focused, is you have them getting ready for like their annual karaoke night, and they're like, oh, Mom and Dad, you're being so embarrassing. And they have kind of a cheesy scene at the beginning, but I thought it was nice. I'm not saying it felt 100% realistic, but it felt like a nice, realistic-ish warm family dynamic, and I do like those character moments like that. But it leads to like the main thing in the episode being Void King, or Knight, or whatever he is, creates this machine that kind of miniaturizes the tech that corrupted him and his wife, and they fire the Rangers with it. They only get Javi and Chase. They're two same person. Izzy. They only get those two. And it corrupts them, and they go back to the base, and they're like, they steal the sporks for him. And it's a really cool scene. I love the score in it. Also, a side note, backtracking to the Izzy Fern episode, she had this like fight sequence when she was saving Fern, and the music was amazing in that scene. Felt a little bit samey having them be under control like Ollie was just a few episodes ago. However, I'd have to say they both played evil well. And something I liked about this one was it was different than Ollie's, where it was kind of more like a I'm under a spell type of deal. And this was more like Void Queen and Void Knights, where they resemble a version of themselves still, but they're corrupted. And then later they're brought back by warm, fuzzy family feelings, like getting karaoke done with their family. I said that really weird, which is cliche. But it was a really nice setup and foreshadowing to the fact that Amelia's connection with her parents will free him later. I thought that was cool. Maybe it wasn't intentional, I think it was, but it was neat. And it was kind of a neat version of the brainwashing, again, because they were still themselves, but like just twisted, so they weren't like, but they didn't remember anything afterwards, which I thought was kind of stupid, but I kind of like that way that went down. It ends on a really good cliffhanger of the drill finally breaking into the base. That's how they stole the rest of the sporks. Was it? I think that Izzy and Javi had failed before, and then I couldn't remember like when they got the sporks, but he was able to finally get into the base at the end of the episode. This was an overall decent episode. I would give it a 3 out of 5. It was kind of another one that was a nice balance between story of the week and plot, except the plot started to creep more in. It was kind of like the serialization of the finale was slowly seeping its way into these episodes. Now, then we have episode 20, The Invasion. This was almost like a 3-part finale. This was almost like the preamble to it. It was a little more self-contained in some ways, as it was about the people of Rafcon showing up finally. The real people of Rafcon this time, from present day. And we find out a lot. We find out, number one, the reason that they weren't responding to Zato's initial calls for help is because they believed it was fake. Because why would knights from 1,000,000 years ago still be alive? I love how realistic that was. Kind of like with the way the planet was overgrown, I actually appreciate things like that and how they've progressed on how realistic it is based on the amount of time that's passed. That's something that always bothered me in Dino Charge, was that Sledge, like for Sledge, millions of years taking place between the prologue and the main series felt like 5 minutes. And I like that this actually shows the passage of time. And the Rafcon soldiers' armor is kind of cheap looking, I won't deny it. I'm going to headcanon that is they say they're basically scavengers, is that's the kind of cheapo stuff they can scavenge. But basically, we find out that they left Rafcon to let it regrow and become inhabitable again, and they split off into a bunch of different colonies and became kind of scavengers. The planet seemed like it was ready to inhabit to me. I don't know. He basically is like, hey, I'm General Zod. We're gonna totally colonize this and make it suitable for Kryptonians. You in? And Zato and Ion are like, no. I actually loved this scene where Zato was talking to the main lady whose name's like Oreos or something. And every 5 seconds when she kept saying something like, we're gonna conquer Earth, Ion's like, there's bad vibes here, man. He's like, even worse vibes. I'm like, I get it. Cisco reference. Anyway, it's funny because there's a couple mentions of crystal powers in this and people are like, Care Major confirmed. And they said the word vibes so many times in this season, or this half season, I'm like, what can I pretend is a Sentai confirmed for the word vibes? Basically, Rafcon people are like, people of Earth are trash, we're gonna colonize it, which I don't like that motivation of like, oh, people are awful, but I find it especially hypocritical coming from the Rafconians who destroyed their planet with their monster plan. And also, it's like, do you really need to, like, are you gonna kill all the humans? Are you gonna take the whole planet? There's like 15 of you. I know there's probably more in space, but based on the way I felt, I feel like there couldn't be enough to colonize the whole planet. But they gotta put it on hold when Void Queen attacks the whole planet, or the whole city rather, with sporks. And so the Rafconians and the Rangers fight alongside each other, and during the battle, she does see the good in humanity. Now the spoilers made it seem like it was only Pop Pop sacrificing himself for her, or putting himself in harm's way, which was a nice moment for him. Pop Pop's a real one, let's be honest. But she also had other little moments, like seeing that they were planting trees, which is a little cliche, but also seeing, I think it was, I don't remember if it was a park ranger or one of the characters helping others get to safety. So I like that it wasn't just one moment, it was a kind of a series of moments, and it was cool to see them fight alongside each other. I think this story had a lot of interesting potential. I mentioned in past videos how it would have been cool if the people of Rafcon were actually the final villains. But regardless, I like that they stuck around and they're in the finale, but I wish they would have showed up earlier, as I think there was a lot to be mined from this storyline. But it basically results in them backing off once they realize people aren't that bad. As a side note, I want to highlight the best scene in the entire series, which is when Pop Pop defends Oreos with a shovel and it breaks and he says, "The infomercial lied!" Now, Pop Pop is injured and he seems to be like he might die, and they end with a cliffhanger of him telling Amelia he's an alien. Great cliffhanger. I'm gonna give this one a 5 out of 5 too. I feel like a couple of these last episodes are rushed, but it was still a great episode with a lot of great concepts going on. I like that, like the Rafcon story and the Void story and Amelia's parents story all kind of came together at once, and it didn't necessarily feel like they didn't fit together, because they all did. Now, penultimate episode time. The Truth, episode 21, where we find out Amelia is from Rafcon, and we see a flashback of Pop Pop taking the baby from Tarek and Santara. Part of me wishes that Amelia's storyline in search for her parents was a little bit more seeded throughout the show. They did it multiple times, but I wish it was a little bit more, because it felt all kind of sudden. I'm glad that it did not dominate the storyline or the character like Tyler, but I wish there was a little more to it. I still wish she wasn't from Rafcon. It feels a little too convenient, but it's not a deal breaker for me. I do like that they mention, I think it might be in the next episode, or is it this one? I don't remember, that the Rafcon people have to have a lot of training to get their antennas up, or in a moment of emotional distress, like becoming a Super Saiyan, basically. So that explains like why it never happened to her before. Some people have brought up, like, wouldn't Zato have noticed during the body swapping, which is a good point, but I'll just write that off to like he probably needed more time in the body, it's a different gender, there's all kinds of reasons. Like there's really no need to get hung up on that. Also, I like that Pop-Pop was a janitor. I kept thinking of that scene in The Force Awakens, like, what was your job when you were stationed here? Sanitation. Really small side note, at the beginning of every episode, the theme almost automatically plays. I like in this one how they held off on the theme, and there was like the revelation, like, I'm from Rafcon, and then the theme played. I kind of wish they would do that more often, have the theme play after a reveal or a scene rather than always at the beginning. Void Queen is taking over Buzz Blast to make her cocoon. One of my favorite Jane moments from the season is when she's seriously reading like the I'm under ransom card, and like at the end she says, turn card over. It was a subtle and funny moment, like Dean Grimley. I just liked it. Now Amelia then goes to the base, which is Area 62 for answers, which she does not know is a villain base, which I thought was a nice touch. She gets her morpher destroyed, and she has a civilian fight with Slither. And this is where I want to take a moment to talk about civilian fights, because that's been like a hot topic in the Ranger fandom, that like people thinking they're necessary or unnecessary. I'm gonna be honest, as much as I enjoy a good civilian fight, I find it to be idiotic to fight a monster without morphing when there's no reason not to, because it's just dangerous. Like earlier, Ian had a civilian fight during the episode where he went to Japan. I'm like, this is stupid and unnecessary. You should just morph. It's illogical. You're just risking your life. But in this case, Amelia's morpher was destroyed, but she's going up against a villain anyway. That's the type of civilian fight I like. I think it's kind of stupid to go unmorphed if you don't need to. It's just dangerous. You don't see Iron Man being like, you know what? I'm gonna fight Thanos without my suit for a bit, just for funsies. I also like how quickly she gets her morpher replaced. Like Zordon totally would have made you quest with like a map, both in the movie and in season 3. Amelia also gets a really awesome instamorph in regards to just superficial stuff in this episode. I'm encountering Void King when they're looking for answers, and he gets his memory back, spoiler alert. I love the poetry it's rhymes moment here at the beginning of the series. Void breaking into the Rangers' home, and like netting, he gets netted. And then in this one, they're getting netted with the same thing, and they're breaking into his base. I thought it was kind of a cool full circle moment. And when she touches Void King, he gets his memories back. Like they share memories like Rafcon, like total like a Spock type of deal here. And I like that, again, they set it up that emotions can break you free of the Spork's control with Izzy and Javi. It was a nice touch. And we also see like how it all went down. You know, Area 62 is basically a POS that kept them in there. They gave the baby over, and during the explosion, I guess the explosion was caused by an experiment gone wrong, Centaura got hurt, and he was like, it seems like Tarek is basically like a mechanic, for lack of a better word, and he can build all kinds of stuff, and he's the one that built the machine. And I'm going to headcanon it that he modified the Dino Knight morpher he found at Area 62 to look like the Void Knight armor, like he modified everything else. But it's a cool origin nonetheless, but a really strong penultimate episode. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5 just because I felt like it was a little bit rushed and jumbled pace-wise. Alright, so on to the finale. So they need to figure out a way to deal with this giant Sporix bomb thing. And Zato comes up with this plan that he can use the Dino Knight armor to transport it away and take the brunt of the damage. But then Tarek agrees to do that for him, sort of to make up for what he's done and help his daughter, and, you know, seems like just make amends and be the one to make the sacrifice if he can use the Dino Knight armor, obviously to become Void Knight again. So we get Void Knight's kind of last ride. We get his little morph where he says, like, Void Armor Energized, or whatever he said. It was cool. Like, I kind of wish we had seen Void Knight get to fight alongside the Rangers a little bit more in the finale arc, kind of like Geizorg got to in Ryusoulger, not because I want it to be like the Sentai, but just because it would have been cool to see him fight and team up with them more than just effectively morph and transport away. Also, we kind of knew this from the spoilers, and I think it was confirmed before, but no Ryusoul Brown redemption suit for him, a la Wolf Warrior, which I'm a little bit disappointed by, just primarily because it opens up the possibility of us getting a figure eventually, and I'm a sucker for, like, the redeemed version of the suit. Although, if I'm being honest, I do prefer the purple color scheme for the suit. But we're getting Cosmic Fury, so maybe there's like a 1% chance that could show up. I mean, the morpher's broken, but I could totally see a possibility of Tarek returning and being like, oh, Solon fixed it, or so I fixed it because I'm an engineer thing that can do random stuff. And I can make a brown version of the armor, and maybe it's like a little bit weaker because it's like faded looking. I don't know. But you never know. You never know. Bottom line is we didn't get it, but I don't think it hurt the overall story. I was just slightly disappointed, to be honest. But he took it away to blow up kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it still unleashed effectively what is Eris from Ryusoulger. However, it didn't go exactly the way I thought. Like, it didn't transform Void Queen into that. It more created like a giant monster blob of Sporix that she's piloting, like a weird organic Zordzilla thing. And so the Rangers have to fight it. They do epic scene in the Zords. It doesn't work. They want to find a way to fight it and maybe let Amelia get through to her. And they end up like skydiving on it. And I don't know if it was intentional, but the scene reminded me of like the Rangers skydiving in the movie. But it's a pretty epic scene. Like you can tell the sort of discrepancy in the visual effects, but I didn't care. It was a really epic, awesome, and unique scene filled with original fight footage, which I just really loved. I thought it was awesome. And then you do have Amelia trying to get through to her, but it doesn't work the first time. Like, it does end up being the cheesy, like, love saved us thing. But for me, it didn't feel, it was cheesy, but it didn't feel bad cheesy for me, like sometimes things in Sentai can, where they're like, the powers comes from Earth's hope. We're protecting people's smiles like dentists. I thought it worked for me overall, both with Void Queen and Void Knight. I think primarily because also the Rafcon people have that like psychic empathy, so it made also extra sense to me, just personally. But I also do like that leading up to it, like it didn't go exactly the way you thought. Like it could have just been Amelia like went up there and said, I'm your daughter, and like touched her, and then it was over there. But when you first think, oh, that's gonna happen, she's like, no, and Amelia gets kicked off, and it's kind of like a cinematic scene. And then Zeto's like, well, I'm gonna sacrifice myself, and he does. He uses what was foreshadowed, the sacrificial attack with the Master Saber, and bringing all the Zords into it, like he digitizes them. So I guess the Zords are gone. You're gonna have to have new Zords for Cosmic Fury. And he does the sacrifice, and it mostly defeats it, but it's not until Void Queen kind of disperses it that it's fully defeated. So even though it's cliche at the end, you still have kind of these steps where you think, okay, this is the final, and then it actually is the final. And that Zeto does sacrifice himself, and he remains dead for a hot second at least, and the Morphin Masters show up, and they say like, oh, now that the Spore Arcs are de-energized, we can Crystal Prison them, and we can't bring Zeto back. And by the way, I know I've mentioned this a lot of times, but the score in this scene was, again, phenomenal. But they're like, Zeto will basically always be with you because he's with the grid, kind of like the Force be with you type of stuff. But we know he's coming back. Part of me wishes that he had stayed dead, not because I didn't like Zeto, but because it would be kind of an impactful sacrifice, honestly. But we get then 6 months later, and Ion has a cafe, which makes sense because he loves food. He's publicly out as a Rafcon person, so aliens living on Earth, again, SPD confirmed. Izzy's winning all kinds of competitions. It seems like she's going to head off to college with Fern, who they're still together, and she's in the finale. Although I feel like she's going to have to postpone college yet again if they're going to space. Javi gets recognized by somebody at the end. They're like, oh my god, I can't believe it. It's Chase! And then you have a little scene with Jane and Jayborg where they're like, we're expanding Buzz Blast to Angel Grove, which I didn't mind that reference. There was a bunch of little Easter egg references all throughout. Some I think were a little too forced. Whereas this one felt like kind of a nice nod. Kind of like there's another nod when they're picking out paint for the baby's room. They have like all these different paint colors based off of past Ranger cities. Briarwood from Mystic Force, Corinthian from RPM, and then Ocean Bluff, who I recognize the name, but I don't remember the season. And also, we find out, speaking of that, who's the baby? It's Centaur's baby. So Void Knight and Void Queen got Void busy again, and Amelia's going to have a little sister or brother, and so we get to see a little bit of that epilogue, and that they're helping restore Area 62 for the Rafconians, which is funny because I was like, I mentioned that in the review like a few minutes ago, I'm like, they want to conquer the whole Earth, but they can't possibly take up all the space. Like, there's like 15 of them. So it's funny that they are moving into some place that can literally fit all there are. I mean, I'm sure there's more like Rafcon colony cells, but I just thought that was kind of funny. The epilogue happens when Solon's like, oh, you got a distress call. And also I like that the Rangers are still technically seemingly active. I like when that happens because I know Rangers operates a little bit different, but it is always funny to me that the Rangers are like, they defeat their main enemy and they're done. Like, they don't care. Any other enemy shows up, that's the next Ranger's problem. Like, imagine Superman being like, well, I defeated Zod. Sir, Brainiac's attacking. Well, that's the next Superman's problem. I'm out. I don't know what to tell you. Then they show up, and the energy signal is this mysterious White Ranger, and they're like, oh, who is this? And of course, it's Zeto in this new White Ranger suit we see. I think the scene very much meant to be an homage to when Tommy was appearing as the White Ranger with like kind of the mystery identity and just sort of the poetry, its rhymes moments of it, which I really dug. Maybe it would have been too on the nose, but I would have dug it if he said, guess who's back? I've talked about the White Ranger suit before. Like, I know it doesn't look the most polished, but I think people tend to forget that it seems like, at least to me, I don't know the behind-the-scenes info, but based on some of the stuff we've heard and how it's come about, it doesn't seem like this was something they've been planning for a year, so they didn't have a bunch of time to work on it. It seemed like, I don't think they made it on the day, but it seemed like it was a more last-minute decision, and so it's not going to look the most polished. And I more so appreciate the idea that they wanted to do something original and end off the season on kind of a high note with a potential cliffhanger. And considering, you know, the time they had, I know it doesn't look the most polished, and I kind of wish it had some white accents on the helmet or something. But setting that aside, I personally dig what they're going for. I know it's a hot take, but I appreciate it. And you know, I kind of like the note they end on. You know, the note is like, okay, Zed's out there, we gotta find him. And I like that. Like, it is a bit of a cliffhanger, and because I actually enjoyed the second half so much, I would have probably been disappointed if we never got to see what happens next, or at least not for a long time if we didn't get Cosmic Fury. But it also just kind of feels like one of those, like, hey, there's going to be more adventures after this you can imagine in your head. So I don't necessarily mind that so much. Like, I guess Lord Zed being kind of a big villain, it leaves kind of a big thread dangling, but it felt kind of like, I would have been disappointed, but it wouldn't have felt like, it's not like you're leaving a character's fate up in the air. I mean, I guess arguably Zed, but you know what I mean. It's not like, is Zato gonna die or live type of situation. It was kind of more like a, if we didn't get out, you know, a third season from this, it would be like a, hey, there's just gonna be more adventures. And honestly, I really enjoyed the finale. All three of these finale episodes, all on their own, were really good, all feeling a little bit rushed, self-contained, but it was still really cool. I thought the final fight was epic and cinematic. I thought it had nice emotional stakes with Zato when he was briefly dead, with, you know, Amelia reuniting with her family. I really liked the epilogue stuff. I really liked the call to a possible Cosmic Fury. I just found it to be enjoyable overall. I would give the finale personally a 5. I thought it was one of the best finales in the modern era. I really enjoyed it. As far as my thoughts on the season overall, I'm just going to kind of give a condensed wrap-up. I will be doing, at a later date, and hopefully in the next couple weeks, an overall Season 2 thoughts video and stuff like that. But I'm going to keep this kind of short because I just went over every episode in detail and just say that if you couldn't tell, I really enjoyed the second half of this season. I feel like I maybe seemed like I was overpraising it, but I was just really enthused about it because I thought it was enjoyable. It was absolutely not perfect. There was some pacing issues in places. You know, I wish like the build up to Amelia's parents had been seeded throughout the series a little more overall. Like, obviously it was there, but I think we could have had a few more check-in points. You know, there could have been a little bit more stories that were fleshed out. Like, I think there was more potential with the Rafcon people, even with the Void family. I think that there was potential to have stories that had a little bit more time to dig into. You know, there was still some cringe dialogue, still some Neo-Saban holdovers and stuff like that, of still forcing in a moral lesson sometimes, which felt unnecessary, some imbalance, but there was never anything that absolutely detracted from the positives for me. So I thought in particular the second half was really strong, and we did have a stretch of filler episodes, but it felt decently balanced because during those filler episodes we still had sort of the main plot running in the background, and that's always nice because it makes it feel like there's connective tissue, and it doesn't feel like you have this set of episodes where you're not acknowledging the main plot and you could just skip them without missing anything. And I like that it was still seeded throughout, and I thought it was a better balance than we've seen in a while between the serialized story and the episodic stuff. And more often than not, the episodic ones did have some sort of contribution either to the plot or the character, in my opinion. I thought it was an overall solid second half. Again, coming soon, an overall Season 2 review and kind of an overall series thought, but stay tuned for that. But until next time, let me know what you guys thought of the second half of the season and what were your favorite moments and favorite episodes. Let me know in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Dawson Ryder, signing out.